14 months after I divorced my husband, I called him because my air conditioner died. 20 minutes after he walked back into my house, one sentence glowing on his phone made me consider something I had not allowed myself to imagine since the divorce: marrying Daniel again. By 3 that afternoon, the thermostat in my Raleigh bungalow read 84 degrees and kept climbing. Late July in North Carolina was unforgiving, and after 2 HVAC companies told me they could not send anyone until the next day, I stood in my kitchen staring at a number I had not called in months. Daniel Bennett had spent most of his adult life repairing residential heating and cooling systems. He had also spent almost 9 years as my husband. I hated that those two facts had suddenly become equally relevant. When he answered, I skipped small talk. My air conditioner's out. I've already called around. Any chance you can take a look? There was a brief pause, then Daniel said, yeah. I can be there in about 20 minutes. He arrived almost exactly when he said he would, wearing the navy work shirt, charcoal work pants, and brown boots I remembered so well. His dark brown hair was shorter than when we were married, but otherwise he looked frustratingly familiar. Where's the thermostat sitting? He asked after a simple hello. 84. All right. Let me see what's going on. That was Daniel. Give him a broken machine and the world became wonderfully uncomplicated. I showed him the thermostat, then stayed out of his way while he checked the system. We managed several minutes of polite conversation about filters, unusual noises, and when the unit had last been serviced. It was almost impressive how efficiently two people who had once shared a bed, a mortgage, and nearly a decade of their lives could discuss airflow without saying anything personal. Our divorce had not come from an affair or one catastrophic betrayal. We had simply become very good at disappointing each other in ways neither of us knew how to explain. I wanted Daniel to notice when I needed him emotionally. Daniel believed taking care of problems was how he showed up for me. The more he fixed, the less understood I felt. The quieter I became, the more convinced he was that everything was fine. 14 months apart had made that pattern easier to recognize, but recognizing it was not the same as knowing what to do with it. Daniel came back inside and set his phone on the kitchen counter while he went to check the thermostat again. I think I found the problem, he said. Give me a few more minutes. I nodded and reached for a glass of water. His phone lit up beside me. I was not trying to read it. I did not pick it up or touch the screen. But the notification preview was facing me, and my eyes caught the name Megan before I could look away. Megan was Daniel's older sister. The message beneath her name was short enough to read in a glance. Did you tell Claire what you did with the house money yet? My hand stopped halfway to the faucet. House money. After the divorce, I had bought out Daniel's share of the bungalow so I could keep it. The paperwork had been clean. The transfer had been completed. As far as I knew, there was nothing left to discuss. Daniel walked back into the kitchen and immediately noticed that something had changed in my expression. I did not pretend otherwise. For years, I had expected him to figure out what I was thinking without making me say it. I was not going to do that again. I looked directly at him and asked, Daniel, what house money? Daniel did not ask what I meant. His eyes moved once toward the phone on the counter, and that was enough to tell me the message was real. He pulled out a kitchen chair but did not sit down. The money from your buyout, he said. Most of it is still there. I stared at him. When we divorced, an appraisal had established the value of the bungalow, and I had refinanced so I could buy out his share of the equity. The transfer had been completed months ago. What Daniel did with his money afterward had been none of my business. At least, that was what I had believed until Megan's message put my name back into it. What do you mean, still there? I asked. I mean I did not spend most of it. My first thought was practical rather than emotional. Are you in trouble? Daniel frowned. Financially? No. Then why would Megan ask whether you told me what you did with it? He glanced toward the hallway, then at the thermostat. The system can run while we talk. It needs a few minutes before I can make sure the temperature is dropping normally. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. I remained standing for another moment before taking the opposite chair. After the divorce, I moved the money into my own accounts, he said. I was going to use a large part of it as a down payment eventually. But I separated some of it and left it untouched. For what? Daniel hesitated, but not as though he were searching for an excuse. For this house. Or for you, if something major happened here and you needed help. The answer irritated me so quickly that I almost laughed. Daniel, you do understand why that sounds strange, right? Yes. We were divorced. You gave up your ownership when I bought out your share. I know. Then why were you keeping your money available for repairs on my house? His expression tightened slightly. That is the part one should have thought through better. You think? I said, sharper than I intended. Daniel could have defended himself. During our marriage, he probably would have. He would have explained that keeping money available was responsible, that emergencies happened, that he was only trying to help. Instead, he nodded. You are right. Once the house became yours, deciding I should have a private backup plan for it was not my responsibility. That took some of the force out of my anger, but not the confusion. Then why do it? Because knowing we were divorced did not automatically switch off the part of me that thought I was supposed to make sure nothing went wrong for you. I leaned back. That sounds exactly like the problem we used to have. It was. His answer came without defensiveness. You wanted me to listen, and I kept looking for something I could fix. I thought solving problems meant I was taking care of you. Even when I never asked you to. Especially then. He looked down at his hands for a moment. I did not understand how. Much of that was about what made me feel useful instead of what you actually needed. The air from the vent above the kitchen doorway had begun to feel noticeably cooler, but I barely registered it. The money was no longer the question I thought it had been. Daniel was not broke, and he was not claiming any ownership over my home. He had deliberately kept part of his divorce settlement untouched because some part of him had continued preparing to rescue me from problems I had never asked him to solve. How much are we talking about? I asked. Enough that I should show you instead of asking you to take my word for it. He reached for his phone but stopped before unlocking it. Claire, Megan thinks I should have told you months ago. She is probably right. He looked at the phone for a moment, then back at me. But I was not keeping that money because I expected us to get back together. I kept it because even after the divorce, I still did not know how to stop acting like your husband. That answer should have made everything simpler. Instead, it exposed the exact habit that had followed us through nearly 9 years of marriage, and I realized Daniel had apparently understood something about it that I had never heard him say before. Daniel unlocked his phone and opened his banking app. He turned the screen toward me, not dramatically, just far enough that I could see the account balance and the transfers that had funded it. The dates matched the months after our divorce. There was no hidden debt, no strange transaction, and no evidence that the money had ever gone anywhere else. I originally planned to use almost all of it toward another house, he said. I looked at a few places outside Raleigh. I even talked to a lender. I looked up from the screen. What changed? Daniel took the phone back and rested it on the table. I did what I always do when something goes wrong. I found something I could handle. First it was looking for another house. Then it was putting money aside. As long as I was doing something, I did not have to think too hard about why I was doing it. That sounded so much like the man I had married that I almost smiled, except nothing about the conversation felt funny yet. So you did not buy a house? No. And I started seeing a therapist. That surprised me more than the account balance had. Daniel had never mocked therapy, but during our marriage he had treated emotional problems as things that should become manageable once you identified the practical cause. When? I asked. A few months after the divorce. Why did you never tell me? Because we were divorced, Claire. Therapy was not something I was doing to impress you. There was no accusation in his voice. That made the answer land harder. He explained that one of the first patterns he had been forced to examine was his need to feel useful. Keeping money available for me had seemed responsible at first. Eventually, he understood that it was another version of the same mistake. He was preparing to solve a future problem in my life without knowing whether I wanted his involvement. So Megan knows because I told her this morning that I was coming over here and that I was finally going to move that money back with the rest of my savings. She said I should explain it to you first, in case you ever found out and misunderstood why I had kept it. I let out a slow breath. I did misunderstand. I can see why. Were you waiting for me? The question came out more quietly than I intended. Daniel understood exactly what I meant. No. He did not soften the word. Not like that. I felt something unexpected tighten in my chest. Daniel continued before I could respond. For a while, I think part of me kept acting like I was still responsible for you because I did not know how to stop being your husband. But that is different from building some secret plan for us to get back together. Therapy helped me understand that if we were divorced, I had to respect what that actually meant. I had spent 14 months believing distance was evidence that we had made the correct decision. Now I was sitting across from a man who had used that distance to examine himself in ways I had begged him to do when we were married. I should have felt relieved. The money had an explanation. There was no financial crisis and no hidden scheme. The question opened by Megan's message had been answered completely. Yet the answer left me with something more uncomfortable than suspicion. Daniel had not been quietly arranging a path back to me. He had been learning how to let me go. He stood and glanced toward the thermostat. 78, he said. It is coming down normally now. I nodded, but my attention stayed on him. For the first time since our divorce, the possibility that Daniel might truly be moving on did not feel like freedom. It felt like something I might actually lose. Daniel closed the banking app and slipped his phone into his pocket. I should check the outdoor unit one more time before I go, he said. 10 minutes later, he came back inside, washed his hands at the kitchen sink, and told me the system was running normally. He explained what he had adjusted and what I should watch for over the next few days, then gathered his tools. There was no reason for him to stay. That realization bothered me enough that, when he reached the front door, I finally said, "Do you want some iced tea before you leave?" Daniel turned around. His surprise lasted only a second. Sure. I poured 2 glasses and we sat at the kitchen table again, except this time there was no bank account between us and no practical problem left to solve. For a moment, neither of us seemed to know how to begin. Then I did something I had rarely done well during our marriage. I said exactly what I was thinking. I blamed you for a lot of things after the divorce. Daniel waited. He did not defend himself or fill the silence. Some of them were fair, I continued. But I had been thinking about what you said. About always trying to fix things. I looked down at my glass. I used to get upset because you could not figure out what I needed. The part one never wanted to admit was that sometimes I did not tell you. Daniel leaned back slightly. You thought you should not have to. Yes. Saying it aloud made the old logic sound less convincing. If I had to ask you to sit with me instead of solving something, then I thought it meant you did not really understand me. So I would get quiet. Then you would assume I wanted space. And I would go find something useful to do. Which made me even angrier. A small smile crossed his face. We were very efficient. I laughed before I could stop myself. It was not the kind of laugh that erased anything. It simply made the truth easier to hold. Daniel became serious again. You were not wrong about me, Claire. I did hide behind being useful. If I could repair the sink or handle the insurance call or work an extra shift, I could tell myself I was being a good husband without asking whether I was actually being the husband you needed. And I expected you to read a test I never showed you. That did not help. I raised an eyebrow. Careful. Sorry. No. That was fair. That exchange would once have turned into an argument over who had started what. Now it simply ended, because neither of us needed to win it. I realized then that this was probably the conversation I had wanted for years, but it was also a conversation I had not known how to have. Daniel checked the time and stood. I should get going. I felt the instinct to ask when I would see him again. I resisted it, partly because I did not yet know what I wanted and partly because I wanted to see what he would do. He carried his empty glass to the sink, thanked me for the tea, and picked up his tools. At the door he said, "If the temperature starts climbing again, call the company number. Someone can come out even if I am not available." It was such a small boundary that I almost missed its significance. He was not placing himself back on call for my life. "Okay," I said. "And Daniel?" He looked back. "Thank you. Not just for the air conditioner." He nodded as if he understood the difference. Then he left without asking for another chance, without turning our conversation into a promise, and without giving me any reason to believe he expected something from me. I stood in the quiet house listening to the steady hum of cool air and understood something I had not expected. Daniel trying to win me back would have been easy to dismiss. Daniel respecting the distance between us was much harder to ignore. For the next few weeks, Daniel and I did not manufacture reasons to see each other. That mattered more than I expected. He did not check whether the air conditioner was still working, and I did not invent another household problem just to bring him back. Then I found the warranty paperwork his company needed to update after the repair, and Daniel offered to stop by after work to collect the signed documents. When Daniel stopped by for the signed warranty paperwork, our conversation felt easier than the one we had shared weeks earlier. I mentioned replacing 2 old windows before winter, and instead of immediately telling me how to do it, he asked whether I wanted his opinion. It was a small thing, but I noticed it. More importantly, I noticed my own response. When I disagreed with part of his advice, I simply said so. Neither of us turned the moment into anything larger than it was. Then, as Daniel gathered the paperwork to leave, I asked how work was going. "Good," he said. Then he paused. "Actually, I have a decision to make." I waited instead of guessing. "There is a supervisory position open in Charlotte. My manager recommended me for it." "Charlotte?" "Yes. Are you considering it?" "Seriously?" The answer landed harder than it should have. Charlotte was roughly 2.5 hours from Raleigh by car, depending on traffic. It was not another country, but it was far enough to turn casual contact into something that required planning. "Would it be a promotion?" I asked. "More responsibility. Better pay. Different kind of work. It sounds like a good opportunity." "It might be." Daniel did not watch my face for approval. He did not tell me he would stay if I wanted him to. He simply explained that he had not decided yet and that he was trying to figure out whether moving into management was actually what he wanted, rather than automatically choosing the next rung because it was available. That, too, was different. The man I had married had measured progress in solved problems, completed projects, and the next sensible step. Now he seemed willing to ask whether a sensible step was his step at all. After he left, I stood at the front window and watched his truck disappear down the street. For 14 months, I had treated our divorce as a completed decision. Even after our conversation in the kitchen, some part of me had assumed there would always be more time to understand what I was feeling. Charlotte changed that. Daniel was not waiting in the background of my life while I decided whether I missed him. He had a life of his own, and it could move in a direction that no longer included Raleigh or me. The thought frightened me, but the fear also exposed something I could no longer pretend not to know. If I stayed silent now, I could not blame Daniel for failing to understand me. This time, if I wanted him to know what I felt, I would have to be the one who said it. The next evening, I called Daniel and asked if he wanted to have dinner with me. I deliberately did not call it anything else. He said yes, and when he arrived at the bungalow, I had already decided that I would not spend the evening waiting for him to guess why I had invited him. We ate at the kitchen table, talking first about ordinary things, but when the plates were nearly empty, I put down my fork. "I need to tell you something, and I am trying very hard not to make you figure it out first." Daniel gave me his full attention. "Okay." I took a breath. When I saw Megan's message on your phone, I thought the money meant you had been holding on to some plan involving me. Then you told me the truth, and somehow finding out you were learning to let me go bothered me more." Daniel stayed quiet. This time his silence did not feel like distance. It felt like room he was giving me to finish. "Then you told me about Charlotte," I continued. "And I realized I have been acting as though I have unlimited time to understand what I feel because you would always be somewhere nearby." I looked directly at him. "That is not fair to you. Claire, you do not owe me anything because I might move." "I know. That is why I wanted to say this before you make that decision. I do not want Charlotte to become a reason you stay, and I do not want fear to become a reason I ask." "You too." His expression softened, but he still did not rescue me from the difficult part. So I said it plainly. "I have thought about marrying you again." Daniel looked genuinely surprised. "You have?" "Yes. And saying that out loud terrifies me because I remember exactly why we got divorced." He leaned back slightly. "So do I. I am not asking you to move back in. I am not asking you to turn down Charlotte. I just cannot pretend anymore that I feel nothing because admitting otherwise is complicated." Daniel was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, "I still love you." The words should have felt like an answer. Instead, what he said next mattered more. "But I do not want our old marriage back, Claire." My stomach tightened before I could stop it. Daniel noticed. "I am not rejecting you," he said. "I mean I cannot go back to being the husband who decides what you need and calls that love. And I do not think you want to go back to waiting for me to read your mind until you resent me for getting it wrong." I almost smiled despite myself. "No. I definitely do not want that. Then if there is ever an us again, I want it to be because we learned something. Not because we got lonely or scared that the other person might leave." His answer hurt less than I expected. Maybe because, for once, neither of us was confusing love with a solution. I looked at him and realized the next move did not have to be marriage, moving in, or another promise we were not ready to keep. He still loved me, but neither of us was willing to use that fact as an excuse to recreate what had failed. I reached across the table and rested my hand near his, leaving enough space for the choice to remain his. "Then maybe we should not talk about getting remarried." Daniel studied my face. "What should we talk about?" I felt nervous, which seemed ridiculous after nearly 9 years of marriage and 14 months of divorce, but perhaps that was exactly the point. "Daniel Bennett, would you go on a first date with me?" Daniel looked at me for a moment, then smiled. "Yes. I would like that." Our first date the second time around was almost embarrassingly ordinary. We had dinner at a small restaurant in Raleigh where neither of us had memories from our marriage, and for once that felt important. We were not trying to recreate an anniversary or recover some perfect version of ourselves. We were learning how to spend time together without assuming we already knew every answer. One date became another, then several months of deliberately moving slower than either of us might have expected. The real evidence that something had changed did not come during the easy evenings. It came the first time we disagreed. I had accepted an interior design project that required several late meetings, and Daniel suggested that I might be taking on too much. I heard criticism where he intended concern, and I felt the familiar urge to become quiet. This time I stopped myself. "When you say it like that, I hear you telling me I cannot manage my own schedule." Daniel started to respond, then paused. "That is not what I meant. But I can understand why it sounded that way." He did not offer to reorganize my calendar. I did not punish him with silence. We talked for 10 minutes, and the disagreement ended without becoming evidence that our relationship was doomed. That small moment gave me more confidence than any romantic promise could have. A few weeks later, Daniel told me he had made his decision about Charlotte. "I am not taking the position," he said. My first reaction was concern. "Because of us?" "No." His answer was immediate. I thought about the pay and the title, and I kept asking myself why I wanted it. Most of the reasons were things I would have cared about 5 years ago. More responsibility, more money, proof I was moving forward. I finally admitted I do not actually want to move into management right now. So you are staying in your current job? For now, yes. I like the work. I like Raleigh. And I am not going to turn staying here into something you owe me for. That last sentence mattered. During our marriage, neither of us had deliberately kept score, but sacrifices had a way of becoming invisible debts when we failed to discuss them honestly. I am glad you are staying, I told him. But I am also glad you made the decision without me. Daniel smiled. That might be the nicest thing you have ever said about a career choice I made. After that, something in the relationship settled. I stopped measuring every good evening against our old marriage. Daniel was no longer my ex-husband proving he had changed, and I was no longer waiting for evidence that trying again was a mistake. We were simply together, making choices neither of us had been able to make well the first time. We did not merge our finances. Daniel did not move back into the bungalow. Neither of us treated those boundaries as evidence that the relationship was less serious. They were part of why it felt more honest. The strangest thing was realizing how different love felt when neither person was required to prove it by anticipating every need. I could ask Daniel for help without surrendering control. He could offer an opinion without turning it into a solution. We could disagree without assuming the disagreement represented everything wrong between us. By the time nearly a year had passed, I no longer wondered whether we had made a mistake by seeing each other again. We had already answered that question through hundreds of ordinary choices. What I did not know yet was what shape this second chance would eventually take, and for the first time in our relationship, I did not feel the need to force an answer before we were ready. Almost a year after our first date the second time around, Daniel was having dinner with me at the bungalow when his phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I recognized Megan's name immediately. For a second, the memory of another summer afternoon returned with surprising clarity. Back then, one notification had been enough to send my mind racing toward conclusions. This time I simply read the preview that was visible from where I stood. Are you finally asking her tonight? I looked at Daniel. He saw my expression, followed my gaze toward the phone, and gave a quiet laugh. Megan really needs to stop sending messages at exactly the wrong moment. Apparently she believes in consistency. I did not pretend I had not seen it. I did not spend the next hour studying his behavior or waiting for him to explain. Asking me what? Daniel dried his hands on a dish towel and looked almost amused by how directly I had asked. Give me a second. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single key. My heart jumped before my common sense caught up. That is not what I was expecting. I am guessing Megan made it sound more dramatic. A little. Daniel placed the key on the table between us. There is a house for sale a few neighborhoods over. I know the listing agent through a customer. She gave me access for a scheduled viewing tomorrow morning. I looked from the key to him. You bought a house? No. His answer was immediate. I have not made an offer. I have not signed anything. I have not even decided whether I like it enough to consider buying it. He paused. I wanted to ask whether you would look at it with me. The distinction mattered more than the house itself. Years earlier, Daniel might have researched everything, decided what made sense, and presented me with a nearly finished plan because he believed removing uncertainty was an act of love. Now he was placing an unfinished possibility in front of me and asking whether I wanted to participate. Are you asking me to move in with you? I asked. No. I am asking if you want to look at a house with me. If we eventually want to discuss living together, buying something together, or doing neither, those are separate conversations. I smiled. You have become dangerously reasonable. Therapy has ruined my reputation. We toured the house the next morning without treating the visit as a decision. What mattered was not the property. It was that Daniel had invited me into the process before there was a decision to inherit. We talked about what we liked, what we did not, and what sharing a home again would actually mean. For once, neither of us treated uncertainty as a problem that needed an immediate solution. On the drive back to my bungalow, I realized the real significance of the night before. The same kind of glowing screen that once exposed everything we had failed to say had given us another ambiguous moment, and this time there had been no suspicion, no silent test, and no guessing. I had asked. Daniel had answered. It was almost absurdly simple. We eventually decided not to pursue the house, and neither of us treated that decision as a rejection of our future. Instead, it left me thinking about something I had avoided because I no longer wanted to rush us. If I truly believed this relationship was different, maybe I did not need to wait for Daniel to decide what our next step should be. A few months after we decided not to pursue the house, I stopped wondering whether Daniel would eventually ask me to marry him again. The question had quietly changed. I knew what I wanted, and waiting for him to initiate it would have been another version of the woman I used to be, hoping someone else would recognize a need I had never voiced. So one evening, after Daniel came over for dinner, I handed him a plain envelope across the kitchen table. "What is this?" he asked. "Open it." Inside was information for a civil ceremony and a date I had tentatively set aside several weeks away. Nothing had been finalized, and the date could still be changed. Daniel read it twice before looking at me. Claire. For once, I enjoyed being the person who had surprised him. "I have not planned a wedding behind your back," I said. "I have not invited anyone. I have not combined anything, purchased anything, or made a decision for both of us. I just set aside a possibility." His expression softened. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Daniel Bennett, would you marry me again?" He did not answer immediately, and I was grateful for that. The first time we married, we had believed loving each other would somehow teach us everything else along the way. This time, the pause felt like respect for the weight of the question. Finally, Daniel asked, "Are we fixing the old marriage?" I shook my head. "No. We are not fixing anything. We are choosing what comes next." A slow smile appeared on his face. "Then yes. I would marry you again." We kept the ceremony small. There was no attempt to recreate our first wedding, because neither of us wanted the second marriage to compete with the first one. Before the ceremony, we also finished one piece of business that mattered to me. Daniel moved the remaining money he had once set aside with me in mind fully back into his personal finances. I kept the bungalow in my name. Those decisions might have sounded strangely practical for two people preparing to remarry, but to us they represented something important. Daniel did not need a private emergency fund for my life to prove that he loved me, and I did not need to surrender independence to prove that I trusted him. We could always revisit our financial arrangements together in the future. What mattered was that neither of us entered the marriage assuming the answer for the other person. A few weeks later, we married again at the courthouse with only a handful of people there. When Daniel took my hand afterward, I did not feel as though we had undone the divorce. We had not. The marriage that failed had forced us to see things about ourselves that staying comfortable might never have revealed. This was not a return to where we had been. It was a decision made by two people who finally understood that choosing each other did not mean choosing for each other. Closing reflection. Sometimes a relationship does not fail because affection disappears. Sometimes two people can care deeply for each other and still become trapped in habits that make that care difficult to recognize. Perhaps second chances matter less because they restore what was lost and more because they ask whether anything meaningful has changed. Time apart cannot guarantee growth, and love alone cannot erase old patterns, but honest reflection can make choices clearer. There are also moments when independence and commitment do not have to compete. A boundary can be an expression of trust rather than distance, and asking a simple question can carry more love than making a perfect decision on someone else's behalf. Claire and Daniel did not find their way forward by pretending their divorce had been a mistake. They found it by respecting what it had taught them and allowing their next choice to be genuinely new. If you had been in Claire's position, what would you have needed to see before considering a second marriage? What part of Claire and Daniel's journey most shaped the way you think about trust, boundaries, and second chances?